Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Rise and Shine webinar featuring the finals from this year's Scottish Charity Awards. My name is Susan Smith and I'm SCVO's Campaigns Manager. This webinar is 45 minutes long and we've got loads to get through, so I just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. Just to say, your lines are muted, but you're free to chat to each other using the chat function. You can also submit questions using the Q&A function, and you can upvote any questions that you would really like the panelists to answer. And this webinar is being recorded, as you've just seen it, and so it'll be available for you and your colleagues to watch afterwards. So this morning we've got three amazing charities that are all finalists in our inaugural Climate Conscious Award. They have recognised the importance of the climate crisis for their communities and are starting to take action to support people through the changes we all have to make. So first up, I'll just introduce them. We've got Anne-Marie Clements from LEAP, which is a Lanarkshire-based community befriending and support service for older people. She's going to talk to us about its groundbreaking Revolve Recycle project. And then we've got Laura Brankin from the 2050 Climate Group, which is a really inspiring group of 18 to 35-year-olds that have recognised the role that young people will play responding to and averting the climate crisis. She's going to talk about its Young Leaders Development Programme. And then we've got Jacquie Winning from Forth Valley Sensory Centre, which works with people with sight loss and hearing loss. She's going to talk about the Making Sense of Energy project. And so we're going to kick off with each of the panellists doing a brief introduction about their project and why they entered it for this award. And to start with, we'll kick off with Anne-Marie.
Hi there, thank you. My name's Anne-Marie and I'm the Partnership Officer at Revolve Recycle. Revolve Recycle is quite a unique project. It's managed by LEAP, as Susan said. LEAP's predominantly an older person's charity. It works to enhance the lives of older people across South Lanarkshire through volunteering, learning, socialising and befriending. Revolve's goal, however, is to reduce textile waste consumption, cut down carbon emissions and decrease landfill waste around fashion and textile. And we do that by offering a range of services that are based on the stories and experiences of the older people who interact with LEAP. So inspired by stories about hand-me-downs and knowing how to mend and repair and stuff like that. And we do that in sort of four main ways: through swap shops, eco-haberdasheries, workshops, community partnerships, all of which are sort of facilitated by staff but led and delivered by volunteers. And that's a brief overview of what we do.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Jacquie, do you want to go next?
Yep, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jacquie Winning and I'm the Chief Officer at Forth Valley Sensory Centre. So I'd like you all to imagine the year is 2050. We've made no significant effort to reduce our carbon emissions. Perhaps you wake up in the morning and instead of checking an app for the weather, you check the measure of air quality. The air outside is thick and it makes your eyes water. Maybe you have to wear a mask. This isn't to prevent the spread of any virus, but specifically to protect your lungs. Except these masks are really expensive, and suddenly so is clean drinking water. Health becomes achievable only if you can afford to buy it. But fear not, it's not all doom and gloom. Thankfully, it is still 2021, and we still have an opportunity to prevent that nightmare scenario. That is, if we all take action today. And that's exactly what our Making Sense of Climate Challenge project helped to address. The urgency of the climate emergency and all that we can do about it. This unique project was specifically designed to ensure that climate challenge information is accessible to people specifically with a sensory loss. We took time to engage with sensory loss communities and identify gaps in information, and then we addressed those information gaps. We took steps to make information not only available in British Sign Language, Braille and large print, but also in plain English and simple conversations. We know how daunting conversations on climate change and energy saving can be. Our overall aim of the project was to engage deaf and blind communities to help them understand not only the crisis, but the actions and responsibilities that each and every individual can take to prevent the 2050 climate disaster from becoming a reality. Our project was highly successful And we continue to work in this area today via the Making Sense of Energy Saving project. Thank you.
Brilliant, Jackie. Thanks very much. That's really inspiring. Last but not least, we've got Laura Brankin from the 2050 Climate Group.
Morning, everyone. I'm Laura Brankin. I'm the current Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees for 2050 Climate Group. So 2050 Climate Group as an organisation exists to empower young people to lead climate action towards a just and sustainable society. And we deliver a number of projects to do this, one of which being our Young Leaders Development Programme. So our Young Leaders Development Programme is aimed at young people aged 18 to 35 to equip young people with the skills to be able to take action on climate change in their personal, professional, and sort of broader civic lives. And the programme is open to all young people and is free for all young people in Scotland to take part in. So the way our programme works is that it tends to last over a 12-month period made up of 6 modules, which cover both climate change knowledge modules, understanding how the climate emergency is happening, how it might impact different areas of our lives, and identifying the key systematic and behavioural changes that are needed to transition to a more sustainable future. And then the other 3 modules are focused on leadership skills and how young people can improve their communication and understand how to motivate and inspire others, all with a goal of influencing more climate-driven decision-making and action. And our Young Leaders Development Programme has been determined by Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, as a world first at ensuring sort of the determination to make sure that Scotland continues to be at the forefront of progress towards a truly sustainable model of economic growth in order to tackle and prevent the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, all 3 of you. I have to say, because this is the first year that we've done this award, I'm absolutely delighted that our finalists are 3 fantastic projects that demonstrate the role of the voluntary sector and the capacity of the voluntary sector to really lead on this, but in 3 very different ways. I don't envy the judging panel, who I believe have already met. But anyway, I don't envy whatever discussions they had trying to choose a winner from this. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that just now. We're just here to celebrate how great all 3 of the projects are. So this particular year of the Scottish Charity Awards is honouring work that went on in 2020, and obviously the big issue for 2020 was COVID and the coronavirus pandemic. So I'm just wondering how that impacted on your work in this area, and how you dealt with the challenges that brought. So I've got a specific question for each of you on that. First of all, Jacquie, did you know, when COVID hit, did you as an organisation have any doubt that continuing to work on climate change project was the right thing to do in the face of maybe more immediate challenges for some of your community?
Well, like everybody, we were taken aback by the speed and the scale of the pandemic and the impact it had on businesses, large, small, and charities. But we were convinced that we still had work to do in the arena of raising awareness on climate challenge. In fact, during the pandemic, there was a lot more talk about climate challenge because people noticed things like less pollution, and they were celebrating things like that. But we had to act quickly to make sure that our project stayed on track. It was challenging, like it was for everybody, because a great part of our project was about arranging face-to-face visits and going out to people's homes and assessing their requirements for reducing energy. But we embraced technology, and it took a while. Not least of which because a lot of the people that we were supporting had communication challenges, and trying to encourage some elderly and vulnerable people to make use of online Zoom and such like was challenging. But they did it with coaching and patience and encouragement. And so we did things like we shifted our home visits to become virtual home visits. And we encouraged people to take their iPads around their houses and show us what was going on. And then our project manager could give advice based on what she had seen there. And so there are ways and means, there are ways around. And like everybody, we had to adapt. But we never doubted for a second the importance of keeping this project alive. It remained a priority throughout the pandemic.
Great, that's good to hear. And I know that you've got some particularly good case studies of people that you supported during the pandemic, and which must have made a huge difference to them at that time in their lives. Anne-Marie, COVID must have presented a huge challenge for you at Revolve Recycle, you know, in that the whole basis, the whole way you've been running your project, which was face-to-face, was gone. So how did you overcome that?
Well, yeah, it was particularly difficult at first. I think just because of what you said there, everything that we do is based out of our shops. So our workshops run in the shops, our haberdasheries run in the shops, everything runs in the shops. And obviously we're a non-essential shop, so we were closed for a really long time. And we sort of quickly realised, wait a minute, we can't just say, well, that's us closed and that's that. Then, you know, we thought we'd better, you know, try and think of other ways in which we can try and still get the message out there within our local community. So we realised quickly, I think we'll maybe all remember, people started to just clear out in the house. and I don't know if you remember, I know that I certainly did. We just had loads of stuff sitting in our shed, and it was like, once shops reopen, we'll get this somewhere. But I know that a lot of other people, once charity shops weren't taking donations and stuff like that, there's a lot of stuff that was at real risk of going to landfill. So we organised doorstop pickups for donations, which is not something that we've done before. So it was obviously something we had to think about logistically. Also because, in case anyone's not familiar with how our model works, when you give us donations, you get points for those donations, and those points then become your currency to spend in the shop, if you want to call it that. So if we're taking this stuff from people's doorsteps, how do they get the points? So we come up with a voucher system. And then once we started doing it, we were like, why have we never, you know, been doing this before? But then we actually ended up with so much stuff. We were like, this is probably why we've not been doing this before. And another way that we adapted, which actually I think we're probably quite proud of, is obviously there was a lot of discussion about you know, single-use PPE. PPE obviously been extremely important. And one thing, and we thought people don't really want to know right now about how to upcycle your jeans or whatever. People are more concerned about sort of other issues. So a lot of our volunteers who are highly skilled into craft and textile started making reusable PPE at home, like very early on. I would say before it became such a big, obviously now there's much more of a push for reusable PPE, but I feel that our volunteers really pushed that sort of early on. And we also then took our same skills and adapted, and we took part in, you might be familiar with the kind of Hearts campaign, you know, when loved ones and stuff were in ICU and relatives couldn't see them, and our volunteers used second-hand and pre-loved materials sort of to make the wee COVID hearts. So there was one for the patient in ICU and one for the family. So just lots of small things, lots of little things that we still managed to keep getting the message out there whilst using the COVID context, which I think probably worked to our advantage.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's really inspiring. And Laura, so unlike the other two organisations, your remit is entirely about climate change. Did you find that any of your volunteers lost motivation or got distracted? How did you keep people focused on climate change, especially after COP26 was cancelled in November last year, which must have been a big thing for you guys? Did you notice a sort of drop off in enthusiasm?
Yeah, so I think, no, definitely, there was definitely a challenge for us, but you know, we managed to keep our volunteers engaged still. I think at the very start of the pandemic, we were midway through our fourth iteration of the Young Leaders Development Programme, which is normally ran face-to-face. So we'd delivered a lot of that face-to-face already. then COVID hit and we, you know, had to deliver the rest of it online. So all of our volunteers involved in that, you know, very quickly got stuck into thinking about, okay, how do we respond to this, and how do we move this online, and how do we move it digitally? And you know, as an organization, we're very well set up for working remotely because all of our volunteers are spread across Scotland. So from that aspect of it, it was quite easy, but we'd never really ran a digital event before. Everything had been face to face and had been sort of day-long events, which, you know, on a Zoom call and an all-day-long Zoom event is not going to cut it. So our volunteers very quickly got stuck into thinking about how can we adapt, and how can we, you know, still finish the program. And we were really keen to, you know, adapt to the situation and make sure that we were still making young people feel connected with one another and able to continue, you know, on that climate action journey. We, you know, a lot of our volunteers work in the sort of climate or sustainability sector, but a lot of them don't. So whilst, you know, we did need to, you know, really push to reduce burnout and make sure, you know, we were having, you know, still having that social element of things, and still making sure, you know, everyone was feeling appreciated in that. I think because of that sort of balance and that sort of urgency to have to deliver something, you know, that the passion was still there. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, again, it's very inspiring to imagine young people continuing to push for this against all the odds, really. So all three of these projects have been our finalists for this award because you are exceptional projects, and you really stood out as the projects that were most successful in this area. And but nothing ever goes smoothly 100% of the time. So I'm just wondering if you have some lessons learned that you could maybe share that some of people watching this webinar might be able to learn from, in terms of, you know, running this project or other projects that have been really successful. And we'll just do it in the same order, and then that gives Anne-Marie and Laura a little bit more time to think about what they've learned. Jackie, do you want to kick off?
Okay, yes, there's always lessons to be learned in all aspects of life, it'd be fair to say. And personally, I'm a firm believer in trying things and not being afraid of failure, learning from when things go wrong, how can we do them differently? So in between various bouts of lockdown, we did try something with our project where we took our message, we've got a minibus, or we had a minibus at that time for the centre, and we adapted it to make it a kind of community minibus, and we could take our message around various communities, which were quite isolated because we're in a rural area here, particularly Stirling wise. Anyway, we adapted the minibus and we took it out, but the take up was poor, really poor. In spite of us advertising in the local press, it would be there, we'd be talking about saving energy. It just didn't really seem to grab as many people's attention as we would like, but we weren't daunted by that. We felt that we'd made a few contacts. It did result in some people coming back and actually going on to real positive interventions with us. We decided that in future we probably wouldn't use that as a method of going and spreading the word, but I'm glad that we tried it. I'm always glad that we try things. I think fear of failure is a terrible thing, so we learn, we live on, and we adapt. And yeah, that's the advice I would give to people. Be brave.
Yeah, and do you think that might have been related to COVID? Because I think that's one of the things over the last 18 months. It's sometimes difficult to know whether there's been a COVID effect.
Yeah, it was just pre-pandemic, so I can't make that the excuse for failure. I think it was just people perhaps in the communities or maybe the weather was really bad. You know, people didn't want to come out their houses and come to our little cozy van, even though we had free coffee and lots of giveaways and things. It just wasn't enough. It wasn't, the messaging had to be adapted. But yeah, since then we've thought of different approaches. We have a new project now that mercifully we've been funded for another 2 years, and it's about making sense of energy change, and it's really good. And so we're using the lessons learned in the first project to ensure that we don't repeat the same but we continually develop and take our message in new ways to people.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Anne-Marie, what about you? What lessons have you learned from being involved in Revolve Recycle?
Well, I do have one that I was going to say, but I think actually just what Jacquie said there, about, having that event and organising that event and then being disappointed with sort of like a lack of engagement. I sort of wanted to acknowledge, I think that that's something that as voluntary sector organisations we all experience. And it can be frustrating and it can feel as if, well, no one in my community is interested in what we're doing. But I don't necessarily think that is the case. I think that we do need to just remember that although we might be well known within our audiences, we are all just small community voluntary groups. So, if a really big organisation put on something, then of course that'll attract hundreds of people. But I think for small groups, like, if we put on an event and only a few people come, that's a few more people that know about you that didn't know before, So I used to find that quite daunting or quite upsetting, I guess. But yeah, I think just trying to have some perspective of a couple of people coming along and learning about your message, I suppose, is better. Obviously, we would want loads of people there, but it's better than none. So I guess, yeah, just kind of that, don't be hard on yourself with things like that, I guess, is what I was thinking. And what I was going to say before Jacquie sort of gave her example, I was going to say that, I think just from a kind of at Revolve Recycle, yes, we've got quite a lot of volunteers. I think this really happens here, but just for kind of voluntary sector organisations in general, you can't really put a value on sort of like the human side of the organisation. I think that's what separates the voluntary sector from the private and the public sector. Obviously it's important and something that's legally required to have policies, handbooks and stuff that we follow, do training, all those things. That's important to be professional. But that's not really, that's not what defines you as an organisation. I think it's your volunteers and the people that help run the organisation. And I think a good lesson, a good bit of advice would be just to always remember that and always just have your volunteers at the centre. I think is a good starting off point, or a good lesson for any volunteer organisation.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Those are both really important reflections that, and I'm sure lots of people would appreciate that. Well, it's one of the things that we're thinking about a lot within SCVO is about the value of the voluntary sector, and that the fact that it is rooted in communities and it is people led is key. And it's really difficult to explain that or quantify that. So it's good that at least we recognise it within the sector. Laura, what about you? What are your sort of key lessons?
Yeah, so I think I would definitely echo what Jacquie and Anne-Marie have both said there about sort of, expectations of things. So our face-to-face events, generally sign up wise, there'd maybe a few people who wouldn't turn up, but generally, attendance would be quite good. Whereas obviously for online events, drop-off rates are much higher. And I think for the first event we ran online, for the volunteers who ran it, they were quite disappointed with the level of drop-off and the actual attendance compared to sign-ups. And I think there was an element of expectations there that wasn't met. So we did kind of have to reset the baseline there for it's natural that for online events, especially during COVID, with people being fed up of being on Zoom and fed up at staring at a screen, that signups maybe weren't going to be quite as high. So there was definitely an element of resetting that baseline expectation and trying to make sure that volunteers weren't feeling disheartened with the amount of work that put into it. But I think as part of that, as we went along the journey, there was a lot of lessons we learned about how to effectively deliver our online events and how much we did in terms of the Young Leaders Development Programme specifically, what we made sort of pre-recorded content available ahead of time compared to having shorter, snappier workshop sessions, which were more conversational focus to, you know, really engage the participants that we did have for a shorter amount of time. And any of that, you know, any speakers or content wise, we maybe made that available beforehand for people to watch at their leisure, so they weren't having to spend a lot of time sitting on Zoom at one time. So there were a lot of lessons learned we took away as well in terms of effectively delivering digital events and you know, the types of support that's needed as well. On the day we'd tend to have, you know, lots of people there, hands on deck to help, you know, register people in, welcome speakers, etc. Whereas you need a lot more technical support for digital events in terms of setting it up, but also just helping on the day as well. So yeah, rethinking the different, you know, skills that we need to deliver both. And I think ultimately for us, what we've learned is that for us, definitely, you know, running things face to face, there's a huge element that our young leaders and people get out of, you know, just the sort of ad hoc conversations at face-to-face events. But there is also a big benefit to having some of it online. For example, you know, people who maybe live in the Highlands and Islands who are not always able to travel down to the Central Belt to attend an event. It does widen the opportunities to get young people involved by having some elements of it digitally. So definitely looking at a more hybrid approach going forward, and yeah, just taking the lessons of the past 12 to 18 months on board about, you know, what works and what doesn't work to delivering things digitally.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I've got one more question, but just to say to anybody in the audience, if you have any questions for the panel, there'll be an opportunity to get those answered towards the end. So if you have, please use the Q&A function to put a question in. So my last question probably potentially covers some of the things you've just been saying about engagement. One of the reasons for launching this award with an SCVO is to try and engage non-environmental voluntary organisations in the climate crisis and the transition to net zero. And what we're finding is that is quite challenging, that people are very much caught up in their immediate day-to-day work, and if that isn't linked to the environment, as it isn't for both LEAP and Forth Valley Sensory Centre, they're struggling to see why the climate crisis or net zero is important to them. So I'm just wondering whether you've got any advice for me and at SCVO and for other voluntary organisations, maybe trustees or members of staff who think that this should be quite important, on how to get your organisation engaging in this topic. So again, I'll just go to Jacquie. I'll just go back into the same order.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, it is a very hard nut to crack, absolutely. And I think I would say if there's any way at all of even just getting the smallest of conversations started with organisations, it's amazing how with a little bit of thought and a bit of discussion, the ideas can snowball, and things that are already happening can be adapted to make them more environmentally friendly. And I suppose an example of that, we, prior to being successful in getting funding for a Climate Challenge Award, we successfully ran cooking lessons for blind people. At the centre, it was something that we did on a regular basis. We have a blind cook who's also an accredited trainer, so an amazing role model for people with blindness to come in and learn new cooking skills. So that was all going on. Once we got involved in our Climate Challenge project, we started to think, what could we do differently as a centre? And so we started to introduce elements of reducing food waste into our cooking modules, and starting just to get people to think about it and think what they could do at home. Very small steps that if everybody took those steps, they could make a massive difference. And that's been really, really a powerful tool. So I think it's about not having huge asks and expectations. It's about planting little seeds and hoping that through conversation and discussion, those will take root, and then it's amazing, you know, what can transpire from there. We've now got a large composter that we've got out in our kitchen garden, and so we put all our cafe food waste through the composter, and the idea is that we'll produce compost which can then be shared free of charge with members of the local community. And something else that we did as a result of the funding that we got for Climate Challenge was we managed to replace all the lighting in our centre. It's quite a big centre that we've got, and we had old style lighting, which was costly and inefficient. So we were able to replace that with LED lighting, and we can show people this is an example of what happens when you put in LED lighting, the reduction in energy bills, but also the nicer style of lighting. It kind of simulates daylight for people. It's easier on the eye. And of course, that's very beneficial for people who have sight conditions. So it's about just trying to find little hooks that could interest organisations and individuals, and then just seeing where it goes from there, and not being constrained by, you know, big asks. Just thinking, what can we do a little bit differently? I've found it quite inspiring and incredible that the directions that we've gone in as an organisation, just as a result of this.
And just on top of that, have you ever had any challenges getting your board on board?
No, got a very supportive board of trustees here. They love the fact that the centre is always looking to diversify what we do. I mean, traditionally, when this centre was set up, it was purely and simply to help people that were blind and deaf. But organically, we've grown to provide a whole range of different approaches and engage in different ways with the wider community to raise awareness. So we're not just providing in-house services to help people cope with blindness or deafness, we're actually letting people out in the outside world know what it's like, the challenges that people face every day. But then we can demonstrate that through these projects like Climate Challenge, or recently we started an employability project that we can go and talk to employers. Our board love that fact that we are never standing still. We're always looking to identify gaps and fill those gaps, but we keep the people, as Anne-Marie said, the people are crucial to this. So we always try to keep our people at the centre. We consult with them. We have 4 of our centre users with lived experience on our trustee board, and they are crucial to helping us decide on the direction that we as an organisation are going.
Great. That's really, yeah, sounds amazing. Anne-Marie, what about you? What's your sort of hints and tips for trying to get an organisation engaged in this issue?
Yeah, so I think I'll just sort of use the example of Revolve and talk about sort of why I think that works. So like I said before, we operate 3 swap shops, and then within the shops we run other things. And what we try to do is, although we have some, you know, climate messaging in our windows, we have some on our social media, what we don't do is when a customer comes in and asks what the shop is about, we're not right on them straight away going, do you know about fast fashion and how much water it takes to make jeans? You know, that's a conversation that we do want to have. But when a member of the community in Rutherglen, Cambuslang or Hamilton comes into the shop, we say to them, this is a free swap shop. You give us what you don't want, you get points, you take what you do want, and then they go, oh really? And you say, and then they say, is it free? And you say, yeah, of course it is. So then they love it, they're hooked, like Jackie said. And then you say to them, by the way, do you know this is about climate change? And then they want to hear about it, because you've told them that you're going to give them free clothes, that we're not you know, we're not a charity shop that's there to raise funds for a cause. We're actually there to provide a free community service. And Jackie used the example about the cooking class. So the people are coming along to do the cooking. And while you're there, you're just sort of drip feeding in some stuff about food waste, and now you're talking about climate change, and we're the same. So we've gave you this free swap shop, which is still quite a revolutionary thing on the high street. You come in, you give stuff, you get stuff for free, and while you're there, we talk to you about climate change. And I think that's really crucial. Again, our workshops bring along people who maybe are a little bit lonely, who want to learn a skill, and see while they're learning that skill, we say to them, actually, the reason we're teaching you this skill is the hope that you won't buy as much new stuff, because you know how to upcycle, you know how to repair. And the reason we don't want you to buy new stuff is because of fashion and climate change. So it's just sort of feeding it in. And the other thing I would say, which I guess ties into that, is I think something that I have learned through sort of different training courses and stuff that I've been on, and I definitely see it in real life within Revolve, is that people will be really likely to change their behaviour if they see a personal benefit in it for themselves, and then also a wider feel-good factor benefit. And an example I always use is switching from a single-use coffee cup to a reusable coffee cup. So lots of places will now give you money off your drink if you take in a reusable coffee cup. So that's the benefit for you. And then you've got a feel good factor because you're not getting a cup and binning it all the time. So that would be my bit of advice, just behaviour that has that personal benefit, community benefit, then people will be likely to engage with it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And Laura, I imagine young people are really engaged in the climate crisis, much more than the rest of the population. So do you have any trouble recruiting people for your programs? And do you have any trouble engaging with other organisations to try and get them to recognise the significance of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't tend to have a problem getting people onto the program. So every year we've launched the program, it's always been oversubscribed. I guess, you know, what we're always looking to do is expand our reach and try to attract a more diverse range of young people and get more marginalized groups involved and that kind of thing. And we've done a lot of work over the past sort of 12 months in prep for the recruitment of the latest program to try and reach out to other organizations to try and get that. But I think like a big part of what we do is, like, if, as Jacquie was saying and Anne-Marie saying, is all about having conversations. We've had over 500 people now go through the Young Leaders Development Programme. If each one of those people can have one conversation with a friend or a member of their family who's not sort of as engaged in climate change and the climate crisis, to sort of just help them understand why it's important to them and what they could do, what small differences they can do to make a change, that's an additional, 500 people. And then if they have another conversation, that it's kind of a sort of domino effect, and it can snowball from that point. So I guess a key part of us is just really empowering the young people that come on the program to have those conversations with other people, to have those conversations with the organizations that they work for, and also within the wider community. So whether it be writing a letter to their local MP, or actually just making sure people go and vote in elections, making sure that they really are making sure their voices are heard and that they're important. And also just we generally regularly have opportunities to speak at events or, be on panels, different working groups. So really trying to encourage young people to get involved and make their voices heard. And I think in terms of engaging with other organizations, to date, we haven't had a problem. I guess it depends what organizations you're going to speak to, but we're always very welcome at our events, whether it be on the Young Leaders Development Programme or at other events, to try and make sure that we're inviting along a diverse range of organisations to input, because it's not just a problem for the environmental sector, it's a problem for, the global economy. And so we want to make sure that, each and every voice is being considered and all the different perspectives, are listened to. So we do try and engage with as wide a range as organisations as possible to kind of make sure we're getting as big a picture as possible of the scale, but also the opportunity to tackle the climate crisis.
That's brilliant, and that work on trying to diversify the young people that are involved in the group is probably really beneficial in terms of raising awareness of the climate crisis with those groups. So, for example, if you're getting in touch with disability organisations to try and get them, or organisations that work with young people in care and so on, I think that's absolutely fantastic, because I think, we recognise within SCVO that it is really important that these organisations do recognise this issue and start to do stuff to mitigate the impact that it's going to have on their communities. And it's not just an issue for the birds and the bees, which of course it is an issue for bees, let's not forget. I don't think, have we got any questions want to come in from the audience? So far we haven't got any questions. So I think that pretty much covers what we have to talk about today. I was just going to mention that we also have recently created a small resource, which I'm just putting in the chat, for voluntary organisations who are thinking about whether or not they should have an environmental policy and you know, activities that they should be doing as an organisation to start making the journey to net zero and responding to the climate crisis. So I've shared that link, and if you are interested in finding out more about things you can do, then you can click on that. But just finally to say, we're obviously here because these 3 organisations are finalists in the Scottish Charity Awards. The Scottish Charity Awards are going to take place on the 1st of October, that's Friday the 1st of October, from 7 to 8:30. And the great thing about them being remote is you can wear a glamorous dress, or you can wear your pyjamas, or you could wear both. It's entirely up to you. But we really hope lots of people will join us on the night with a glass of wine and help celebrate the winners and all the finalists. I joined last year remotely thinking it was going to be dull and I'd have the TV on in the background, and it was absolutely riveting. It was a brilliant night online. So my colleague has just posted a link for how you can book a place at the Scottish Charity Awards. It is free, but you do have to book. So so please do, and panelists, please do make sure all your supporters know that they need to book as well. So I think that's it for us. Thank you very much to Anne-Marie, Jacquie and Laura. And thank you for everybody who's been watching and listening. And I hope you've learned something and will be taking some action to combat the climate crisis. Thanks very much, everyone.